Greetings to my fellow peace blunderers, and today we're starting a new series of recaps dedicated to, well, guess what event is taking place right now? The pinnacle of chess skill, also the pinnacle of not sitting in your chair, the World Chess Championship 2023. Jan Nepomniachtchi is battling it out with Ding Liren for the ultimate chess crown. The event is taking place in the capital of the great Kazakhstan, Astana, and boy, I'm so happy it got renamed back to Astana. I couldn't bear calling it Nur Sultan. It just felt inappropriate for many reasons, some of them political, but yeah. The event taking place in Kazakhstan mainly means that those of you guys who live in Americas don't have a very good time tracking it live because it's going to be too early for you because time zones. Anyway, what we have got in this matchup is obviously creme de la creme of the chess world, some of the most exciting players out there, as World Chess Championship challengers should be. And in game one, as we can see right there, Jan is playing as white, thus starting the game. And as you can see from the title up above my brick head, this is going to be a game of missed opportunities. This is going to be a game after which Nepo is going to very much rue big missed chances because the game ended in a draw, despite the fact that Nepo definitely had a moment where he could snatch the full point. So the game started in a very orthodox way, very typical for any chess level really, let alone the highest one. We have got the Ruy Lopez, one of the most popular, one of the most thoroughly studied, one of the best chess openings out there. We've got e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, so we've got bishop b5, hence the Ruy Lopez a6, of course, attacking the bishop, which is the most popular move. Very typical stuff. Bishop retreats to a4, knight f6, castles, all good. Bishop e7, very, very standard. Thousands of master and grandmaster games going like this. However, this is exactly the point where Ian decides to throw a spanner in the works, even if I could put it like this. This is a moment where Nepo decides to surprise Ding and see how Ding reacts to it. You see, in a vast majority of games, the following move that is played and is honestly expected to be played is rook e1. Followed by something like b5 by black attacking that bishop once again. This a6 b5 theme is very common in a lot of Ruy Lopez's. We've got bishop back to b3, the only square that is available to the bishop without losing it. And then the game goes either d6 or castles, most likely d6, c3, the game goes on and on. This is not what happened, but this is one of the main lines. And what Nepo decided to throw in was very interesting. He took on c6. Now, it is not uncommon for the bishop to take the knight on c6, but not now. Usually, it happens right here. Usually, when a6 is played by black and when the bishop is attacked, this is when the capture happens. This, what Nepo played, is what is called the delayed exchange. The exchange did happen just a couple of moves later. The outcome is roughly the same. We usually want to take that c6 knight with the bishop so that the pawn structure on the queen side for black is ruined. Well, okay, ruin is probably a strong word. Let's just say slightly compromised. And this is signaling us the Nepo's plan for the game, at least one of the plans. You see, he is going to exploit that structural weakness of black's, not now, though. You see, this structural weakness is easier exploited closer towards the endgame, when there are fewer pieces and when these pawns are becoming more and more difficult to defend because this structure is slightly cumbersome, not as mobile. It's impossible, for example, to move the c7 pawn without moving the c6 pawn first, so and Nepo is counting on it to be a problem later on in the game. And now, for a second move in a row, Nepo throws another sideline of a sideline, if you will. From this positions, most people by far play d3, a very standard move in the Ruy Lopez, yet again, opening up the c1 bishop and protecting the e4 pawn. However, he played rook e1, and I will explain why in a moment. Rook e1 defends the e4 pawn just like d3 does, but does so obviously not with another pawn, but with the rook. We don't play d3 so that after knight d7 from Ding, we can play d4. Nepo doesn't want to tie the d pawn to the defense of the e pawn. He employs the rook to do that, to attack in the center immediately. And the f rook goes to e1 and lots of reload passes anyway, so why not do it as fast as we can, right, to enable d4. And this is still a position that has been played dozens of times, not very often, but there are existing games, and this game is going to go just as most of them go up until a very certain moment. So takes with queen, and not with the knight, takes with queen, this is very important. Castles, bishop f4. Now, of course, since we played d4, the bishop has been opened up. And the point of the bishop on this diagonal is very obvious. Remember that thing I told you about the structural weakness on the queen side? This c7 pawn is going to be very annoying to defend from black's perspective, because it's very difficult to move. Like I said, it's not going to move anywhere until this pawn moves. And yeah, this bishop is aiming at that pawn, and this has to be dealt with in one way or another. Now, Ding plays knight c5, the purpose of that little maneuver, f6, d7, c5, offering a trade of queens. Now, the trade of queens happens in the vast majority of the games in the library, right? So a lot of masters and grandmasters have chosen to just trade queens here and just try and play this relatively drawish position out. However, Nepo decided to throw a third novelty, if we can call it that. Nepo decided not to trade queens, which I don't know if Ding expected. Honestly, can't tell. Nepo played queen back to e3, not allowing that trade and trying to use the queen for later. And how he is going to use that queen, we're about to see very, very soon. But not before Ding plays the first real inaccuracy of the game. This position, I would assume, is completely new to Ding, because it would be kind of hard to expect him to know the theory by now. This is a third deviation from the main line, and a massive one. So it's safe to say that Ding is out of box, so he's just playing chess by now. Whereas Nepo most likely is still in his prep. So Ding plays, like I said, the first move of the game, really, which is bishop to g4. Now, on surface level, it doesn't look very bad, does it? We are just developing a bishop. g4 is a very natural square for the light squared bishop, and we're connecting everything on the 8th rank, and we're maybe planning to double something up. Why not? However, when we played bishop g4, we kind of allowed knight d4, which happened in the game. And that's why the engine's recommendation is not to allow knight d4 by playing not bishop g4, please, but knight to e6, controlling d4 and also attacking that bishop on f4, which isn't that big of a deal. The bishop safely retreats to g3, but a secondary idea to that is that, okay, since we didn't have a trade of queens right there, and this queen is on e3, we have something to harass and to attack. We moved the knight away from c5 to e6, that's fine. We are now going to play bishop c5, attacking that queen on e3. And this position is like, okay, for both, it's almost zeros. This is what probably should have happened if Ding were to play correctly. Something like queen e2, queen e6 is a very interesting move. Developing the queen, maybe preparing this rook to jump into d8 at some point. This rook, of course, wants to go to e8, really. And eyeing down that b2 pawn, a simple knight c3, rook e8 gives us an equal position. However, again, coming back, bishop g4 we have on the board, which allows knight d4. And again, you may ask, knight d4, I mean, okay, I guess the knight is nice and centralized and all, but what's the big deal? Well, we're about to see. Queen d7, which is, again, not the best move, but very, very understandable. Ding, I guess, is aiming to punish the knight on d4, because the knight on d4 is only defended once and is defended by a queen, which is not the most stable of defenders anyway. And the plan here is more or less clear. Queen d7, and like I said, rook 8 to d8, doubling up and attacking that knight twice, right? So knight c3, very, very logical move. Knight wants to go to c3 in many, many, many positions, developing the knight, connecting the rooks, and now rook 8 to d8, as advertised, hitting that knight twice. And suddenly, this position, unbeknownst to both players, becomes very venomous. There is a deadly tactic creeping up, which neither of the players saw, actually, because it didn't happen on the board, but boy, if it did, we can only wish. So, as we can see, the knight has now attacked twice, which was Ding's main idea. Very straightforward. Don't forget that the defense by either rook doesn't really work that well, because rook 8 to d1 kind of loses the rook, so no. However, the best move suggested by the engine that white should play here, by far the best move, is the ridiculous h3. Giving up the knight, kind of, sort of, attacking the bishop on g4 instead. And the idea is that if queen takes on d4 and black isn't suspecting anything, it's like, okay, I'll take the knight, you'll take the bishop. I guess we are fair and square. I guess I'll be better off when it does happen. This doesn't look like a big threat. We are equal material, and you know, your pawn structure is also getting compromised on the king side. Why should I be bothered about that? You should be, because if you do take the knight with the queen, instead what can happen to you is the ridiculous knight d5. And boy, just look at that. First of all, the knight on d5 cuts off the rook from the queen, which means that the queen is vulnerable. It's under attack. At the same time, the bishop is still under attack. Of course, don't forget about that. And we have this bishop under attack as well, and white is now completely winning. So first of all, if pawn takes knight, just queen takes queen, right? I don't think I need to go over that. The queen was undefended, so it got captured. If takes the knight with queen, just pawn captures. Same shtick, not good. If, alright, so if the queen is so vulnerable, let's just exchange it first. So we're gonna take on e3. Don't forget that there is this nasty intermezzo with the bishop that is hanging, coming with check. Now, knight takes on e7 comes with check. King h8 is the only legal move, thus it's forced. And now we've got to be very careful. We've got 3 possible captures of the queen. We need to make the correct one, which is bishop takes. For a simple reason, the material is equal as it stands, but black has got 2 pieces under attack, and you cannot save both. One of them is definitely going to drop, giving white an advantage that reaches almost double digits. However, we're not living in Wonderland. None of this happened, although this was a fascinating line. And Nepo didn't even play h3 on move 14 here, which would kickstart this tactic. That's why I'm assuming that neither of the players saw that. And if you're wondering, okay, so if h3 was played on the board, we've already seen how queen takes d4 is a terrible option due to tactical reasons. Knight d5. Does black have any healthy alternatives? Well, yes, actually there is one. And it is to play rook after e8. And now the position is slightly in white's favor, but nothing too critical. We're giving this bishop up, and white may as well take it. We can now very safely take on d4 and just exchange pieces, basically, because knight d5 doesn't work anymore. If you see the variation like this now, we can easily take the queen here, because even after knight takes with check, we can just capture the knight, right? And after rook takes here, we've got equal material, and it's all nice and sound. If bishop takes, There's no really merit to this knight being attacked because it can just capture the undefended pawn on e4, and white is actually a pawn down and black is better. So it would have been better to just capture with the rook and play with complete equality. The engine says it's all zeros. However, like I said, none of that happened. Nepo did not play h3, which may have launched this tactical sequence. What we got instead was the move that shows us why knight d4 was so important and why allowing d4 from Ding via bishop g4 was a bit of an inaccuracy, because from d4 the knight can now jump into f5, and this can be a slight issue. Of course, the knight is supported by the pawn there, and the knight is attacking the bishop on e7. And you may wonder, okay, so the knight is attacked twice and only defended once, so doesn't it just drop a pawn like so? Of course it doesn't, because we can just take the bishop on e7, and it's not very good for us. Black is dropping a piece. So no, this is not an option. Of course, taking is an option and actually is a best move, but only if you take with the bishop and you not follow it up taking with the queen. Just do like this. And this is actually the best move, something that did not happen. In this position, Ding played another inaccuracy. It's not a mistake, maybe just a slight inaccuracy. Like I say, bishop takes f5 is the best move. The problem that Ding may have been afraid of was that after pawn recaptures and after rook f to e8, which seems like the best and the most natural move, Ding may have been probably scared of something like f6. You see the pawn traveled to the f file and is now threatening the king side. It's not a very pleasant move to face. You've got to be very careful, of course. Something like bishop takes on f6, which seems like a free pawn, and we're also launching an attack on the queen. Doesn't work. Don't forget, the bishop on e7 was crucially defending the knight on c5, so the knight is now free. Can be captured like so, so it doesn't work. The best move would be just to keep the bishop on that same diagonal, of course, so that it still defends that knight by bishop on f5, sorry, bishop f8, which is always a very good move when you get to play it. Always play bishop f8, according to one very famous grandmaster. And actually, black is completely fine, even after something as ridiculous as takes on g7, takes queen, takes bishop, promotes with check, of course, takes rook, takes, and this is actually still okay for black. Rook back, check, king h8. Yes, there are some weaknesses on the dark squares, and there is a dark squared bishop that white has got, and there is no dark squared bishop for black. However, don't forget that black has got a queen as opposed to white. So this position is tricky, but black is fine. Black is actually supposed to be better. But I can understand why a position like this can be feared by Ding, especially against Nepo as white. So he didn't want to go for that if he saw that. So he decided not to push his luck, not to take that knight on f5, and just to proceed with a simple knight e6, something that he should have played earlier, not allowing knight d4, like I said. But then again, well, what can you do? Better late than never, I guess. The knight is attacking that bishop, of course, that can always retreat. But first, the knight takes the bishop on e7 with check. And this is actually a big problem. And the problem with that is that black doesn't have a bishop pair anymore, which was supposed to be black's trade-off for the ruined pawn structure. Remember when the bishop from a4 captured knight on c6, black received a slightly compromised pawn structure, but instead gained the bishop pair. Probably black's biggest asset. Well, now black doesn't have that anymore. And more crucially, if I go back a little, remember that the knight just captured the dark squared bishop. So we are arriving in a position, of course, queen is going to recapture the knight. We're arriving at a position where we've got different colored bishops, opposite colored bishops, which you might say, well, opposite colored bishops, I read somewhere or I heard from someone, is a draw. Not necessarily, because you need to keep in mind that that weak pawn on c7 that I've mentioned a couple of times before is on a dark square. That means that white will always have an extra attacker on that pawn. The bishop that white has got can attack that pawn, whereas the bishop that black has got cannot defend it. That is why long term the position may look a little bit shaky for black, so Ding really has to be careful. Now, coming back to the game, don't forget that the bishop is attacked, and the dark squared bishop, although defended, it is not hanging, is not something that Nepo would want to lose in a position like this. So bishop to g3 now. Now Ding plays bishop h5, which is again not the best move, it's just about okay. The engine suggests a very interesting f5, which is something that Ding probably should have considered. It is, at first glance, a bit anti-positional, but if you look at it closely, e takes f, bishop takes f, and the position is opening up, and it's unclear in which favor it is opening up, because don't forget, white rook is still on a1, whereas black is getting some nice pressure. Now, of course, it has to be mentioned that this knight is a little bit compromised. However, there is no immediate way of making this knight suffer, or the queen behind it suffer. So this would have been an interesting situation, really. It is the best move according to the engine, f5, opening the position up. Bishop h5, though, is also decent and is very, very understandable. Because if we go back a step, the knight probably wants to stay on e6 for as long as it can, for a very simple reason. Not having the light squared bishop for white means that it's going to be quite hard to kick this knight out from e6. If white had a light squared bishop, for example on b3, just captures the knight on e6 and it's very happy. However, it's no longer an option. And the knight on e6 is a very good knight, controls some very, very nice squares, or at least is fighting for them. More importantly, though, it helps defend c7, which does require a bit of defending. So a very good knight on e6. And as long as that knight stays on e6, since we wanted to stay there, the bishop kind of has no future, just like me. So it needs rerouting, clearly, and bishop h5 is a very nice attempt of doing so. The follow-up to that is going to be something like f6, and then bishop to f7. Which is going to happen. Now, f3 for white, a bit of a multi-purpose move, really wants to maybe free up some dark squares for the queen or the bishop to jump into, if they so wish, and also supports that e4 pawn, a very decent move, and some could say never play f3, but in this position it's not really harmful. You see, black, again, doesn't have a dark squared bishop, which means the threats along these diagonal are not going to be very, very sharp. The only piece that can exploit this diagonal is the queen. It's not looking to do that anytime soon. So we're getting f6 as I advertised. Now h3, again, opening up some dark squares if need be. The king can also come into h2 and sort of tuck itself in a corner where it's going to be very nicely protected. Now h6. A move that follows a similar pattern and a similar logic. As you can see, it opens up some light squares for the bishop, and maybe the king can come into h7 if it needs to do that. Now bishop f7, completing that maneuver, bishop h5, f6, and bishop f7, developing it, making it more relevant to the position so that it looks at the queen side where most of the play is expected to happen. And now white plays rook a to d1, developing his last piece. And again, here I should mention that this position is just so slightly better for white due to the compromised pawn structure on the queen side and the fact that we have opposite colored bishops where this bishop is more threatening and attacking. However, it is at this point most likely still a draw. Yes, Ding did play some slight inaccuracies. For example, allowing knight on d4 wasn't great. It resulted in losing the dark squared bishop. Playing bishop h5 probably was a bit too passive, a bit too slow. Bishop h5, f6, bishop f7 should have followed up with f5 instead. But so far, these inaccuracies haven't cost Ding anything. Maybe a bit of annoying long-term pressure, but nothing more. Next couple of moves, though, are going to be key. Now, Ding played b6, which is a fine move, one of the better ones. b6 aims to stop queen a7, which would have been kind of annoying. Now, if you ask me why queen a7 wasn't played before, for example, why not play queen a7 now? If it's so good, instead of rook a to d1, get that rook back, it's irrelevant anyway. Let's play queen to a7 now. It's actually not as good as it stands because it can be countered with queen b4. Now the queen is attacking this and protecting this. And the position is now from slightly better for white is equal. However, later down the line, queen a7 may be a threat, so yeah, that's why b6 took place. a3 from white, following kind of a similar logic. Remember, if queen a7 was a threat, so was queen b4, so a3 takes away the b4 square from the black's queen, and Ding plays a5, taking up a bit more space on the queen side, but crucially, kind of compromising those pawns. Now, 3 of the 4 pawns on a queen side are in the dark squares, which may be just about okay, but you've got to watch it. As soon as one of them falls, the rest will probably follow. And now from Nepo, we're seeing a very elegant retreat and remaneuver of the knight to e2 with a very simple idea. Of course, we can challenge later on in the game that knight on e6 that black has got, which is again very important for defending that c7 pawn. Now, Ding decides to trade a pair of rooks. We see rook d8, of course, developing another rook to that open file. And now, instead of exchanging another pair of rooks straight out, Nepo plays a relatively tricky move, playing the rook, but not all the way. Rook to d3. And the ideas are plentiful here. For example, if Ding were to take now, rook takes, queen takes, we would get an open file to ourselves now for sure, because the queen, the black has got, cannot really challenge it if you really think about it. This square is controlled by the queen, this square is controlled by the queen and the bishop, and this square, boy, you've got to be really careful. And this is very important. Queen d8, you're like, haha, you take my queen, I take your queen. However, the bummer in this position, which makes this position instantly winning for white, is a very, very simple bishop takes c7 with a fork. The knight and the pawn is forked, and we are basically dropping even more material, and we're definitely losing here. And we need to remember this idea. This idea will repeat itself in the future. Remember this queen trade with knight ending up on d8 and then bishop capturing on c7 is going to be very important. And another idea of rook d3 is basically what happened in the game. Ding now plays c5, which is okay. It does put another pawn on the dark square, but it at least helps fight for the d4 square, which is a decent square to try and go and fight for. And now we see queen d2, which basically asks the question, what is black going to do now? Because, well, we are in a world of pain. The same idea that I just showed you is in play. If I give black a nothing move, such as, I don't know, king to h7, we can see the same pattern repeating. Rook takes, queen takes, we've seen that somewhere before, haven't we? Queen takes, knight takes, and then bang. We see that? Same shtick. Knight and pawn getting forked and white winning very, very easily. And here, after queen d2, Ding crumbled a little bit and made the mistake in the game, which could have cost them. It didn't, but it could have massively cost them. And Ding obviously saw what I just showed you, and he thought probably that, okay, since the bishop is threatening to take on c7, I just make c7 a non-issue. I just play c6. I get the pawn out of there, which kind of solves something, I guess. The pawn on c7 is definitely not going to get captured because it's not there, but it does open up massive possibilities for white long term. The pawn on c7 was kind of at least stopping the queen from infiltrating in a way that I'm about to show you. Now, Ian obviously found the right idea here. He took the rook, and remember, taking with the queen is ill-advised for a third time because of this. So Ding is forced to take with the knight, which did happen in the game. And now the point of c6 and white was a mistake. Now queen f4 is played, and we can see now that the queen is basically roaming free in black's queen side, with the c7 pawn not being there anymore. If the c pawn was still there, there could have been some capabilities that black had. For example, okay, the pawn would have been attacked twice. We could move the knight back to e6 or something like that. Now, though, pawns don't move backwards. And this is a problem. This is a big problem. And the theory here is that, well, why did Ding allow this? The theory is that the Ding saw this but didn't see it exactly 100%. He might have thought that after queen to f4, something like queen b7 is fine, right? So the queen is controlling all of this and not allowing the white queen to infiltrate. Or is it? Because the white queen can actually infiltrate with queen c7, because guess what? Queen takes, take 4, the same shtick. And Ding probably realized it too late, that the defense of queen b7 doesn't work, and this is now actually a problem. This queen is a massive problem, and there isn't really a way of stopping it. So he played the best move, which is really the best out of a bad bunch, which is b5. Okay, so remember how we got always this knight and this pawn on b6 forked? Well, it's not going to get forked anymore, again, because the pawn is not on b6. And now you could be saying, well, okay, we may have saved the b pawn, but what about that a pawn? What about that a pawn? If that fork happened again, the knight and the pawn, the a pawn would have got hit now instead of the b pawn, right? And yeah, you are right. And this is exactly the reason why black is actually losing in this position. If white plays it correctly, and if white keeps applying the pressure on the queen side, the a5 pawn is inevitably going to drop, and the potential for creating a strong passed pawn with a 3-on-3, forget about this pawn, it's gone. The potential is going to be immense, and white is going to most likely win, because the 3 pawns that black has got are very cumbersome. And Ian starts going in the right direction, plays queen b8, and starts applying that pressure. And forget about the pawns even for a second. With queen b8, there is an even more dangerous threat. We can see how this knight is pinned to the king, and the knight is attacked. It's defended for now, but don't forget that if I gave black a nothing move, such as h5, it will be massive trouble, because the bishop comes in as well and adds another attacker to the knight, and the knight is inevitably dropping because it can't run away and there is no sufficient defense. So after queen b8, the only move that makes any moniker of sense for black is to get rid of that pin, so that if the knight is attacked twice by the bishop, at least the knight can move away. So Ding plays king h7, the only move that makes sense and the only move that is good. And this is where, my dear people, Nepo started bottling it really, really hard. So far, Nepo has played a very good game. You could say a near perfect game, and Ding has been consistently making slight inaccuracies and finally made a big mistake that is probably about to cost him. It's Nepo's turn now to do some really silly stuff. Again, the best way to go about it is play that bishop c7 with the same idea. Fork there, attacking the knight twice and attacking that a5 pawn, which cannot be saved anymore. Knight e6, bishop takes a5, And this is very, very, very difficult for for black to hold. The only reasonable idea is to push forward with the knight, something like knight d4, attacking the knight, more importantly, attacking the pawn, and forcing the trade of knights like this. But yes, it fixes the pawn structure a little bit for black, but it doesn't solve any of the problems because this pawn is now relatively weak. Bishop b6 starts hammering that point home, attacking that pawn. Okay, we can defend it with something like queen d7, sure. However, queen a7, attacking it twice, and what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? Queen d6 check, for example. Okay, is only delaying the inevitable. King just goes to h1 and feels very, very safe. And yeah, this pawn is going to drop unless you play d3 and just sort of try and maybe give it away. C takes d, and you may think, haha, I'm going to take that pawn back. So we're even Steven. What about that bishop? What about that bishop? The bishop is hanging. So even if you try and play d3, you can't really recapture it immediately. You've got to address the bishop problem first. So something like bishop b3. And you may think, maybe I can capture on d3 now. Well, no, because d4 and bye-bye. And, you know, white is just 2 pawns up at this point. So bishop c7 was absolutely pivotal to Jan's winning chances. However, what he did instead, he played a bishop move. He just played the wrong one. He played bishop d6, attacking that queen instead, not getting that fork in. And the problem with that move is that after queen d7, you've got to be really, really careful. You've got to be really, really careful because, yes, a pawn you might take on c5, but the problem is this is kind of the wrong pawn to take, if you see what I mean. Yes, in both of these variations, the one that I'm showing you right now and the one that I showed you with bishop on c7, where it took on a5 like so, in both cases, black loses a pawn. However, there is a world of difference between this pawn structure with bishop c7 and this pawn structure with bishop takes on c5. As we can see, this pawn structure is completely symmetrical. There aren't any weaknesses, and it's much harder to exploit. On top of that, we are allowing queen d2, which is infiltrating white's camp, and it's not as easy anymore, is it? So the knight is attacked, the pawn is attacked. The only way to defend both is kind of go knight d4, right? We have knight getting out of the way and defending that pawn, very nice, but the black knight now springs into life with knight to e6, forking these two and basically forcing the trade of knights. Knight takes, bishop takes, and look, this position, I am not sure, even with the extra pawn that white possesses, that white can win. Don't forget that this is also very weak now, and yeah, the engine also agrees this is about plus 0.4, which is virtually nothing. And that is why after queen d7 did happen on the board, Nepo changed his mind. He probably now realized that taking the pawn there is, well, not the best thing to do. And this is very, very, very painful for Nepo at this point. He probably, right now, as soon as queen d7 was played, or maybe even as soon as bishop d6 was played, he realized 100% that he did something wrong, that the position is not as easily winning anymore. And he decided not to proceed with that taking of the pawn. He decided to go another way, and he played knight g3. A very interesting idea, and it is the second best move. The idea is that, well, if white were to take this pawn now, there is no knight to attack with queen d2. That's one thing. But most importantly, the knight can now try and jump onto f5 if it so wishes and pose a problem to the king side that black has got, maybe creating some weaknesses, exploiting them, who knows. And the position is now back into closer to equal territory. The winning chances are slowly fading away. Ding is also following suit with the development of his knight to e6. It can't be stuck on d8 forever, right? And here comes a point where Nepo made a second mistake, which completely eliminated his advantage. He played f4. And I don't know, my amateur brain does not really understand f4. Probably it was just a move that is partly caused by frustration, because, probably Nepo realized he lost a little bit of his edge and decided to go like a bit of more attacking, moving knight close to the king side, moving the king side pawns. But in reality, f4 is not scary at all. If anything, it's relatively weakening. On f3, the pawn was sitting there very, very comfortably. On f4, it can be pressured. Not to mention, this e4 pawn is also a bit more exposed. So, yeah. The engine now states that the position is basically all zeros, and it suggests a very simple, a very intuitive, actually, knight d4, development of the knights, opening some scope for the queen, if need be, and attacking this pawn, naturally. And Ding could have played it, but probably didn't play it because maybe he was afraid of c3 and knight b3, something along those lines. Maybe he was afraid his knight was getting a little bit stray especially after something like queen to f8. Maybe he was bothered by the overwhelming presence of white's pieces on the king side. Maybe he was worried about some mating threats, and his knight on b3 isn't really helping. So he didn't want to commit to that. And I understand why. And this is where I'd like to talk about one very important thing that I haven't discussed yet. It is time. Look on the left. I think it's left. Look on the left. We have 11 minutes for Ding and we have 20 minutes for Nepo. And this is move, well, I'm showing a theoretical position, but at the time of the game we had f4, which was a mistake by Nepo, and this is move 31, right? This is move 31, and the players crucially don't get increment in this edition of the World Chess Championship. So each move they make doesn't come with additional like 30 seconds on the clock. No, just they make a move, they press the clock, and nothing happens. They only get 2 hours at the beginning of the game. After move 40, they get an additional hour. This is what they're hoping for right now. And after move 60, they get an additional 50 minutes. And increments only take place after move 60. After move 60, yes. Then, after each pressing of the clock, they will get additional 30 seconds. Only then increments start working. But for the first 60 moves, no. Play like normal people. No increments for you. So basically, at this point in time, move 31, played by white, Ding has 10 more moves to make in the remaining 11 minutes. Basically, almost a minute per move, which is excruciatingly painful at this high level in a position where you are defending and it is complex. So you've got to understand that Ding is probably not going for the riskier options, going for the more straightforward ones, the ones that are easier to analyze, the ones that he can play without much risk, and then after 10 moves, when move 40 strikes, he can get an additional hour and spend a bit more time. And actually, this is quite funny. If you saw the thumbnail, which was titled as chair versus chair, that is because during the game, almost neither player ever sat in their chairs. They have like separate lounge zones they can go and rest in. They have like food and drinks there. So basically what was happening is that after each move, Ding did that more often than Nepo. Still, Ding basically after each of his moves just made a move, wrote it down, pressed the clock, and just whooshed away from the table to his lounge zone. He spent, I don't know how much time, like 80% of the whole game in his lounge zone, apart from the times where he was in time trouble and he had to spend more time on the board. Now, it's not like he wasn't thinking on the game whilst he was in the lounge zone, because they apparently have this screen there where the game is shown. So even from the lounge zone, you could be looking at the screen as if he was looking at the board and analyze the position from there. Sam also was making jokes in the chat that maybe Ding doesn't like to play 3D chess. Like, it was easier for him to comprehend the position on a 2D board shown on the monitor than on the real board, which is ridiculous, of course, but fun nonetheless. And Ding spent a lot of time almost meditating in the room. He was also seen very frequently putting on his jacket or something. I don't know, was it cold? In Astana, I wouldn't think so. I mean, Kazakhstan is a rather warm country, I would expect, especially in April. Bizarre, but bloody hell, it was just kind of funny. Almost all the time, you would, of course, I watched the game live, and you would look at the screen and there's no one on the board. Just people just walking around and sitting in the lounges or something ridiculous. So, again, f4, not a good move by Nepo, equalized the position immediately if black plays knight d4. However, Ding didn't go for it because he was a bit scared of what I just showed you. He played also a decent move. He played h5. He kept the knight on a6 closer to the king side, where he might have sensed there might be trouble. Just, playing h5, maybe going for h4, kicking that knight out of g3, a decent idea. And Nepo was like, all right, fine. I'm going to disable knight d4 then, so c3. Knight d4 is not advisable, to say the least, of course, and Ding just plays c4, not allowing any c4 from white if Nepo ever wanted to play it, and puts another of his pawns on a light square where it is much, much, much safer. And yeah, basically after playing bishop d6 and f4, Nepo made this position very, very hard to win. And yeah, he played h4 now, not allowing h4 for Ding. Ding just, played queen d8, and he's like, okay, I'm just gonna offer a trade of queens. And even if the trade of queens does happen, we're just gonna chill, I guess. So let's say take stakes. This fork is no longer that big of a deal because, okay, knight goes to e6, and the problem is with f4, one of them at least, is that if bishop takes on f5 now, we can take on f4. That's why f4 wasn't so good. It's weakening and it allows black to target something, so that fork isn't that great anymore, right? And Nepo decided to struggle for a little bit, which is understandable. I would probably have done the same. Queen b7 is like, nah, I'm not going to trade queens. I'm going to try and figure maybe something out. Attacking the bishop, kind of attacking the pawn as well. Of course, this is all very easily resolved. Just a simple bishop e8. Knight f5. Yes, okay, fine. Finally, getting the knight to f5, maybe threatening something. Has to be careful about g7, although the knight is protecting it. But a very simple queen d7, just cutting the queen off of that part of the board. And then, are you going to trade? Are you not going to trade? Queen back to b8, queen back to d8. We're reaching a similar position. The only difference is, in the previous position where the queen trade was offered here, the knight was still on g3. So, Nepo did trade queens this time around, hoping that this position is a slight improvement on the previous one, because again, the knight is a little bit more advanced, but in reality, it just changes absolutely nothing. Now we're getting knight d4, knight b7, basically getting knight onto a relatively good square, protecting that pawn just in case, attacking that bishop as well. And with e5, Nepo made his last attempt to ask a serious question of Ding. This is move 39. Nepo played move 39, which means Ding has 2 more moves to play before he gets an extra hour. Ding has got 2 minutes, 39 seconds left on a clock, and this is a very interesting move by Nepo because he is basically trying to complicate the position a little bit, give it a bit more dynamism just before the 40th move, so that Ding may blunder, perhaps in time trouble. You've got to do that. Before the 40th move, before Ding gets time to think, you've got to really ask him the final question. Unfortunately, this question isn't that difficult. Ding just very calmly came closer with his king, like so, to g8. Taking on well, taking on e5 is, well, it's not very advisable. I guess we can just take here. It's still okay, I suppose, but it's more complicated than just non-taking. We just don't take, we play king g8, and, you know, e6 is never going to happen. Nothing to be scared of because the bishop is hanging. So, no. The position just stays as it is. Now, white plays king g3, bishop d7. We reached move 40. Players got an extra hour. And yeah, this is basically where very soon they agreed to a draw. I'm going to play the remainder of the game very, very quickly. So bishop to c7. Actually, a very neat idea. Trying to maybe hopefully play e6 now, because don't forget that e6 is possible. The bishop is no longer hanging on d6, but black puts a stop to these attempts with knight to c5, now making e6 just ridiculous. He does drop a pawn on a5, but this is ultimately not going to matter, because even this extra pawn, it just literally does nothing. King goes closer, and black is going to capture some pawns of his own. As we can see, the knight is destined to go to d3 and wreak some havoc on white's queen side. Bishop, before trying to get rid of this knight before it does any damage, things like, no, of course I need my knight. Knight d3, e6 now, which has been made possible, but in the end it doesn't do much. So bishop takes, knight takes. There was a bit of a diversion there. Bishop back to d7, attacking that knight, asking some questions of it. Knight goes back to d4, and now Ding takes a pawn of his own on b2 right there, which was weak. And just a couple of really unimportant moves, they agreed to a draw. King f3, knight d3, g3, knight c1, king e3, and this is where the draw happened. So yeah, in the end, I think it was a frustrating game for Nepo, because he's playing as white and he has an advantage, but he just can't convert. He made some crucial mistakes towards the end of the game, which resulted in a draw. And next game, Ding is going to be playing as white, and Ding is going to get a bit more confidence from his defense, recovering from some mistakes, and we'll see. We'll see how this game plays out. Of course, Ding will be a slight favorite on form and on morale coming into the second game. But you could argue that Nepo is objectively just a slightly stronger player, so it kind of evens out. We'll see. So yeah, please let me know in the comments below if you'd like this series to continue. And if you just so happens to find this video useful, please like and subscribe. Follow me on Twitch. I stream Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. Find me on chess.com. Join our Discord. All that good stuff. And I'm going to talk to you very soon. My favorite unintentional gameteers. I love you all. See ya in the next one.